From building OakNorth, one of UK's most successful digital banks, to redefining SME finance at Finom, Kristjan Kaar has quietly shaped Europe's fintech revolution. In this episode, we uncover how to build AI-driven financial products that people actually trust, hopefully. Why speed and regulation can coexist if the culture is built right within the organizations. What most founders get wrong about hiring their first product leader. And the next big wave across the European fintech and potentially beyond in the US, because I know you had some insight from there as well. So we want people to tune in to rethink what's possible in product, culture, and intelligent finance. So to get you started, always quick fires, a little bit of warm up. So your first non-fintech product that blew your mind and hooked you.
So I think for me, maybe a bit of background for the audience to get to know me as well. But the product of globalization. I've lived in 5 different countries. And my first country that I moved to was when I was in high school. And I went to high school in Norway. And back in the day, we didn't have things like WhatsApp or all the technology that you can enjoy today. And it was immensely difficult, now looking back to it, not that far away, to stay in touch with friends and family. And the product that I vividly remember using back in the day was Skype.
Of course.
And Skype had a wonderful hook for users in my situation. They had great offers for people who were in education, people that were studying. And so I remember using Skype for, almost every evening or several times a week. And I was later on reflecting back on that experience, having been through the product lifecycle and product career. That was one of the best hooks that they could have given it to me. They gave the product for free for many years. But then many, many, many years later, I realized that I probably accumulated quite a lot of balance up on Skype. And it was a good ROI probably for them. But yeah, so that's the product that I can vividly remember that stood out from the rest. Calling someone back in a day was very complicated, and doing that through Skype solved the problem very seamlessly.
And then did that then become your passion about product and technology, or that's just a product that you loved and can still remember today?
So I think my passion for technology probably started earlier than that. So, back in the day, I was quite young. I started coding quite young, building websites and just learning coding languages from quite a young age. So I'd say actually my passion for technology started when I was probably 10, 12. And then later on, I got passionate about finance. And now my career has turned into Fintech, which is a combination of those two things.
Awesome, and we'll come to that some more. What was the first time that you saw technology genuinely change a business?
So this is my first experience with a real platform shift. And a little bit more about me. Many, many years later from this experience, I graduated university in the US, and I was lucky enough to be hired by a company called Bloomberg. And it was around about the time when cloud became a thing. So, AWS launched, I believe, in 2006, GCP a couple years later, and Azure perhaps a couple years later as well. And I remember vividly having our first customer conversations with some of the most sophisticated fintechs or financial institutions out there. And it was all about application software. It was all about what color the button should be, and when you click that button, what should I expect to see, and can you build us more tools? And within a couple of quarters to a year, the conversation shifted completely on the back of cloud, which was really about forget about all the tools you can build us. Just give us the intelligence, give us the data, and we build it ourselves.
Even then.
And I think this was a very vivid experience where I realized that the world is changing very quickly. And it's a wave that won't be stopped, right? Now reflecting back to it many years later, there have been many technology platform shifts, and this was just one of them. And we're in the midst of one now, where probably technology will look very different a couple of years down the line.
Don't give it away to the audience just yet. So hopefully we'll come to that. However, I need to get through a podcast soon where we don't talk about AI. First oh shit moment as a product leader.
Yeah, so more to my experiences. So after spending a couple of years at Bloomberg, I moved on to a startup called OakNorth. And OakNorth wasn't as well known back in the day when I joined them. And they only had a couple of product people at the time. But what they did have is that they had hired 50 to 80 engineers and data scientists and machine learning engineers. And what I found there was that when you have a very compelling vision, which OakNorth did, the vision was always there, but you are lacking the strategy. You have 80 different people running in a different direction. And the strategy is really what connects all the different squads or all the different product and technology people to one unified direction. And if you don't have that strategy, very often, regardless of how brilliant people are, you don't get progress, you don't get velocity. And so what was my holy shit moment was the fact that I realized that I was hired to do this. And I had to bring the strategy to the table. I had to connect the tissue. And, that was a challenging and a daunting task, I think, at the time.
And that's easier said than done. So I remember parts of this journey you told me a couple of years ago. So connecting the tissue, it's easier said than done, and actually getting everyone singing from the same sheet and moving in the right direction and having that strategy. So is there any things that you did initially to change that? And then what was the success off the back of that as well?
Absolutely. So I think regardless how brilliant people are, and there are lots of brilliant people in technology and product, there has to be a direction to make everyone row in the same direction across the business. And so what did we do? Clarify the vision, set the strategy for where we want to go. That's usually 12 to 18 months out. And then most importantly, build the teams around it to make it happen. And I'd say I've used that playbook now many times over. And it's a playbook that I strongly believe in. And so that's what you have to do. And you won't see progress overnight. You'll see progress in a couple of quarters when things are starting to happen on the back of it. And so why is that important? Is because I'm a big believer in the vision and the strategy, perhaps coming from the leadership of the company, and from inputs and with inputs from the product and technology people, but giving maximum empowerment for people to bring that strategy to life. And that's where magic happens, when you're able to connect the top levels of the company with the people who do the work and bring things and experiences to life. That's something I've learned works.
And how do you assess for that, though? Then you need to bring the right people in. So how do you actually assess for that?
It's a great question. I think what makes products great, and having spent my career in product, if you look at great products, there are great people behind those products. It's not an accident that those products came to life like they are. And so the quality of talent and the caliber of talent is, I'd say, one of the key determinants how good your product will be. But it's not the only thing, right? So it's the ecosystem that you're able to create.
Yeah.
The alignment, even internally within the business, that is super important as well. But talent is always, in my eyes at least, one of the key starting points to determine whether you can be successful or not.
Yeah, we'll come on to talent shortly, my favorite subject. But you helped build OakNorth during the hypergrowth phase, one of Europe's first real intelligent banks. What would you say was the hardest barrier breakthrough in terms of blending AI, credit models, and real world lending together? And I think I remember, I could be wrong on this, but when, again, 2 years ago, you spoke about an interesting pivot at OakNorth. So it'd be good to
absolutely. So I don't think that was always the case at OakNorth. And so this happens to a lot of companies. And I think this happens when companies mature, and perhaps also happens a lot more often when you get a banking license. And I've experienced this many, many times over through friends and colleagues who have worked in other places. And so what happens very often is you get more regulatory scrutiny, and you lose what makes product and technology people great, or product and technology people and teams great. And that is taking some risks, moving quickly, right? And I think very often that comes from the fact that people interpret banking regulations in a particular way and force a framework that the regulator doesn't actually tell you have to force onto the teams. And that's very rigid. It's usually a very rigid framework. And so I remember vividly in OakNorth Bank, when I took over the team, that was one of the things we went to work on immediately, is how do we create a framework within a regulatory environment where we can keep the customers and the company safe, but at the same time have great product velocity. And to me, this is incredibly important because you're not able to retain great product or technologists with not having great product velocity, not having great vision or strategy. People see through that very quickly. And so building that ecosystem where, again, you can keep the company safe, but you can have great velocity was job number one.
I mean, that's hard, right? Balancing as well the risk and reward and the regulation piece in all industries, but especially financial industries. How did OakNorth's culture then enable, I suppose, deep tech and banking to coexist together as well?
Yeah, so a little bit about OakNorth's culture. So what I deeply appreciate is the founder and the co-founder and CEO, Ricci, who has built the business. He has brought the DNA to the company, which is very business oriented. And I think that sets the tone for the rest of the company, which is when you think about products, or you think about technology, or even beyond that, bring value, right? Let's prove value. Let's take experiments, let's take some bets, but let's also prove the value of the things you bring to the table. And so I think that culture also helped in some ways because, not everything was always product led, right? Some things were led by other teams, some things were product led. And I think the combination worked quite well. But what really, I think, cracked it was people's mindset.
Yep.
And so, the direction from the co-founder and CEO obviously was a key part in that, but it was also people's mindset in operating that environment. Which, if you think about risk, very often you would think of risk people who try to block you and stop velocity. It was more about collaboration and how do we make things happen. And the question is, how can we not? And so I think the mindset was a big part of that. And it's a fast-moving environment, right? It's a fast-moving company. Not everyone thrives in that culture, I can tell you as well. But if you do, and if you believe in the direction the company was heading, it was a very rewarding place to be.
And was there any other the secret needle movers that really kind of got you going as a business when it come to product-led and product-led organization?
Yeah, I think so. I think, and this is an interesting thing, and I'm not sure if I've ever told Ricci this, but we had a metric in product, which is how many steps ahead of everyone else in the business we are on ideas and validating ideas. And so what I found very quickly is that, especially if you work with very talented founders, you have to be ahead of them. And what we used as an internal metric very often was a lot of the ideas that came downhill, our goal was to be ahead of those and have great sort of articulation and strategy, what should we do and what we should not do, already thought about in advance. And so that was almost like an internal KPI or a metric that we used.
And that was your job, to be ahead of the founder and CEO?
Yeah,
basically.
my job, but also I had a team around me, obviously, that supported that, and technology as well.
That's interesting. So how do you do that? How do you the founder and the CEO? It's always the toughest thing, especially product as well, giving away their baby. is a lot of the conversations that I have as well. But then also to try and be ahead of that person who's clearly obviously very visionary, and then ideas like, where did that go? Maybe where did that go wrong? Did you think you were ahead of him and then the idea crashed and burned, or?
Yeah, look, I think you could try to be ahead, right?
Yeah.
I think in some things we were clearly ahead, in some things not. Look, not everyone's an expert at everything,
Yeah.
and I think that's also being a part of a great CEO is realizing what you know and what you don't know, and so what you need to lean in on and what you need to let other people drive forward. But yeah, so what that meant is lots of ideation, lots of exploration, and being, most importantly, outward looking rather than inward looking, right? So what that means is spending time with your customers, spending time with people in the market, right? Rather than pondering internally what you could do. And I think that is still a guiding principle that drives me today.
I'm definitely going to have to send this podcast to Ricci now. What did
you
you
go.
learn about product engineering alignment in the highly regulated environments as well? Because I suppose even in Bloomberg, you'd have been in those types of environments as well, where it's challenging.
Yeah, I think it is. I think there's, I think regulation doesn't necessarily create space for perhaps modern development teams, right? So very often, that's not what you see really in a regulated institution, be that in insurance or banking or anywhere else. I think there's more and more of that now, where especially in the kind of fintech hotspots, you definitely see true product-led businesses, and you see that in the UK, you see that in the US, and also in the MENA region, where there are true product-led businesses. And I guess the guiding principle that I always come back to is, product and tech are one of the same coin, right? It's the same coin with two sides, and they have to be aligned. And the way you do that in a regulated environment, it does bring some things to you that you need to be more conscious of, but it doesn't break the model, and it doesn't break the model of how you would build businesses, perhaps in a slightly different setting.
And I love numbers and metrics and data. So what did that look like then from the start to your journey with OakNorth in terms of where you were and where you got to before you obviously left?
Yeah, so in terms of the business itself, I think OakNorth, from a lending book and revenue perspective, 5x, I believe. We started also with a much fewer number of users and customers that we had, and that grew tremendously. So on a personal side, I think we probably 3x our customer base, and on a lending side as well, with the loan book growth. Quite substantial growth. So yeah, it was never a business, I would also say, that really optimized for the sheer volume of users. It was always optimizing for the value that we could create for those users.
And how did you balance your relationship? I don't know how much interaction you maybe had with the board. How did you balance your relationship with someone like Ricci, super bright, entrepreneurial? What's the where I'm getting this is like, how do you help others that need to balance those founder dynamic relationships to ensure that you're obviously thriving in the role, and then also balancing the relationship with the CTO as well?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So, well, there are lots of different boards, right? So that definitely isn't going to work in every board, or the same formula is not going to work in every board setting. And I think there are lots of different expectations for people in executive roles as well. I think product is one of those areas where lots of people have opinions, though, right? And so I think you, as a product professional, you need to really understand, how can you make a difference, right? So, and that's one of the criteria that I always use before I take another gig or I consider it. Can my experience, can my skills make a difference? And if I determine that I can't, then it's just not a place for me. If I determine that I can, then it's an interesting conversation. And part of that is understanding, where the company is going, what's the human capital like, what's the strategy, how the company is performing, can you get along with the CEO, which is a huge part of this, right? So especially if that CEO happens to be a founder. How do you determine who does and how do you sync, right? Because if it's a product-led company, very often the CEO and the founder would want to at least participate in the direction that you're heading, right? And so how can you create an environment where you can be successful, the company can be successful, and your team can be successful at the same time? And so, yeah, I think there's no magic formula to that, but I would always say, what I live by is, can I bring something different to the table here to accelerate this business? Because that's ultimately what you're there for as a CPO, right? So you're there to accelerate the business. You're there to grow the business, and that's what you got hired for.
You touched on human capital there. So you all look at an organization and look at the talent within that organization, and does that have the ability to align with you and who you are and drive the sort of the business growth? Are those the things that you look at, and how do you maybe assess that then from an outside perspective? And so I look at that as a double-edged sword in the sense of there's opportunity to make changes and also the environment that you're going to be in.
Yeah, so perhaps there are a few. So absolutely. I think even if you try not to, you form an opinion about people that you meet along the way. And I think very often you look back to, and the initial kind of gut feel you have about the business ends up being true, right? And so I think there are a couple of things, which is, especially when you speak about product and technology people, what's the background? What have they done? What are they optimizing for when you speak to them, right? So do they optimize for delivery, or they optimize for customer experience and a customer problem, right? And you get a very quickly a sense of kind of the makeup of that team by a 10-minute conversation, right? Not more than that is needed. But I'll also say that very often you don't have the luxury as a CPO, for example. It'd be great if you could always build your team, right? You very often end up inheriting a team. And so the model that I have is look at that and ask the question, again, if you think that you can make a difference in the business, what that team and what the company could look like rather than what it looks like today.
Yeah.
And because that's another reason why you get hired, which is, can you think and can you take a leap of faith and say, this business could operate at a very different level than it does now?
I mean, easier said than done. I'm a big Man United fan, and obviously been following that journey for a long time, and that's been a challenging one, and we've had the money behind it. So there we go. If you could rebuild OakNorth today then with AI native tools, what would you do differently?
Where do we start? Look, I think there were a couple of trends as well, right? So we already saw a couple of years ago, a massive SaaS trend. And so first of all, I think there's lots of components today. And the way I would think about this, what are the kind of user experience differentiating components, and what are, problems that are well solved in the industry? So I think, first of all, OakNorth was built quite a few years ago. As a result of it, some of the choices that were made were kind of let's build everything. And I think lots of other banks and fintechs have taken the same direction. I think there's some merit in that, right? But now with the emergence of AI, I think the build option really comes a lot more to question. In other words, do you want to spend a couple of million, right, on a core banking system, or could you get to 80% functionality yourself, perhaps, right? Do you want to build all the tech that you use internally between teams, or could you just do that through AI instead? And so I think there's lots of it. I think if you were to say, let's build everything again from today, you would take a very, very different approach to this. And I would my estimate would be you could get there in a fraction of the cost. I think building a bank is anywhere between 15 to 40 million. Depends on how sort of resource intensive you are, how well you use your money. I think you could do that at a fraction of the cost today.
Wow. I had someone on the podcast a couple of months ago that said there's a bank that spent 300 million and it's still not in the hands of a consumer, which is crazy. So look, now at Finom, you're helping reimagine SME finance across Europe, from invoicing to multi-banking, expense management. What barriers do you think European entrepreneurs still face when managing their business finance? And obviously, tell us more about Finom as well.
Absolutely. And this is really one of the reasons why I fell in love with the company. One of the reasons, there were three reasons, and this is one of them, is that the disruption you've seen in banking across the US and the UK hasn't really gotten there across all of Europe yet. And so you're somewhere between 5 to 6 years behind in mainland Europe from where the UK is today. And what we do believe very strongly that there will be leaders forming in that market. So there are already a few. We're firmly in the race, which is exciting. But we do expect that there will be some, 2, 3, probably 4 companies who have a chance to be the leaders of Europe. And what does it mean to be a leader? There are lots of very successful fintechs that dominate a country, but there isn't a fintech or a bank that have been successfully able to dominate multiple countries and be the number one in multiple countries.
Why is that?
It's quite hard. So if you go to a market like the US, it's very ubiquitous. If you go to a market like Europe, all countries have their particular nuances, and you would have to do a lot of localization as an example, right? So the way you would run your business, perhaps in Germany, is very different than the things you would need to run your business successfully in Italy. And so it's very cost intensive. So it's quite expensive to build everything around it to really compete with who you're competing, which is mostly traditional banks, and also companies that are looking for kind of better experiences. But mostly you're really competing with traditional banks, and so you have to make quite a lot of upfront investment to do that.
So back to the question on like European entrepreneurs that still face when managing their business finance and how Finom come into play for that.
Yeah, so we do think that the problem is still there, very much. So if you're a business, a small business, you have anywhere between 2 to 50 employees. You have a couple options: either use a new fintech like ourselves, Finom, or you go to a traditional bank. And traditional bank probably does what you would expect them to do quite well, and that is accounts and payments, and that's about it. And as a result of it, you would have to use a lot of external software to support you along the journey. And what our mission is to bring that into a financial operating system for entrepreneurs into one place, where if you run that business, if you run that size of a business, you wouldn't have to go and offboard yourself to many different software packages. You can choose to do that if you want to, but it probably is a lot easier for you to do in one place. And so we'd provide everything from your kind of local IBANs or local bank accounts to payments, to international payments, to FX, now also lending, and we're getting into more financial products. But also, very importantly, we solve the jobs to be done for entrepreneurs, which is everything around how do they actually manage their business. And they don't spend a lot of time making payments. They spend a lot of time around the admin of receiving and making payments and chasing invoices and all that. And that's what we want to solve for. And then finally, we want to do that with the help of AI. That's a wave that we think will disrupt user interfaces or product quite substantially, both in the service layer, but also in the user experience layer. And so that's our last component, which is how do we bring it to life through AI?
Amazing. And how do you balance then being data informed while making bold, intuitive leaps that data can't possibly predict yet at the same time?
I think this is a really hard one, especially in the age of AI. So there is no data out there that will tell you how would you craft the user experience, for example, that the customers could love in the future when the platform underneath you is shifting. So, and I think I had this great conversation with someone that other day, and I think the real point is that we've over the last sort of decade or a couple decades, we've become accustomed to various metrics to measure product, right? So monthly active users or weekly active users, or whatever metric you come up with. What's the metric that you're going to use to measure the success of AI products? And so perhaps the things that we are accustomed to knowing are going to now be completely changed, right? And so it's a real question. How do you measure the success of an AI product? And now there are lots of white papers out there and suggestions of how you should do it. But there isn't a universally understood metric yet out there, right? That will really explain that. And so I think you have to take a leap and say the data perhaps isn't there, or the data is not going to get you there in these questions. And you probably have to trust your gut, and also taking a leap of faith of where the technology will end up.
I mean, interesting you say parts of that, because I was even having a conversation with this tier one VC, and they were talking a lot about how it's making it challenging to assess these new immersive founders and building AI companies because of some of these reasons as well, in terms of who to invest, which is why it's a bit all over the place at the
Absolutely.
moment. What is your North Star metric at Finom then, and how does it actually influence product focus?
Yeah, so for me, it's always important to have a business North Star metric. And for Finom, it's obviously growth. We're a growth business. We completed a Series C a couple of months ago. And so we're growing our teams, we're growing our product, and it's very exciting times ahead of us in general. But when you take and say to product teams, let's all accelerate revenue growth, it doesn't resonate, right? And so we have a very key metric, which is effectively we have a word for that. They're called every week pairs, but effectively how much of recurring customers can we capture. So these customers that do recurring transactions with us week on week on week, and how many can we capture? And our real hypothesis or thesis behind that, of why I choose that, is because we want customers to love our product. And if you're a business that has, you're quite sizable business, or even a freelancer, you would probably do transactions on a weekly basis. And we want to be that place where you do that. And so that sets the tone for how we think about product. What are we optimizing for? What do we decide to build? Or what do we not decide to build? And we optimize for that metric.
I love that. And obviously Finom's building AI-powered financial intelligence. What's hype versus what's real right now?
Yeah, it's a great one. I mean, we could probably spend another couple hours in AI itself, but I firmly believe that there's a little bit of froth in the market today, and there's lots of investment going in, and there's huge capex cycles that hyperscalers are right now also seeing, aka building lots of data centers, and there's definitely hype in that, right? And I think lately also the quality of those revenues that these hyperscalers are showing can be also questioned to some regard, right? There's a lot of inter-operating contracts, for example. So there definitely is a bit of hype in that. But I think really saying that this is a platform shift that you should ignore, I think would be very dangerous. So I think it is a fundamental platform shift. I think we are starting to see more and more AI embedded in products, and in places where it works really well, and in places where it doesn't quite work yet.
Where's that? Where doesn't it work well?
I think lots of people, and this is where probably you have boundaries in product creativity is, we knew that all the LLMs started with a chat interface, a dialogue interface, so therefore we must have a dialogue interface. And I think that's where a lot of the products go wrong. So, if you look around, the number of chat interfaces products now have, and some of them are quite good, some of them are really not that good. And so that's usually kind of what you see products put in, is some kind of a chat interface that allows you to do some actions, or get some data through a chat interface. I think that's a stopgap to where we're going to go, which is truly AI native experiences. But I think we're still some time away from that. There are obviously software out there that does this, but I think kind of mass market in terms of how that's going to really transform all products. I think it's going to take a bit of time.
And Revolut is obviously taking over the world at the moment.
They're doing great.
Doing great. And obviously you want to compete, and especially obviously in Europe, correct? You want to hire the right people. You need to hire A players. I always call it the builders and makers mindset, the products, the technology people, the ones that are at these companies that are performing very well right now. Why would someone come and join Finom?
I think there are many reasons. So first of all, let's tackle Revolut, and then I'll come back to your question. So look, Revolut is playing a global fintech game, and you do have to give them credit where credit is due. The velocity and speed of execution they have is just great. But we don't actually consider them our number one competitor. And mainly because the reason is because Europe is too small for their ambitions at this stage. They have bigger ambitions. That's not to say they don't compete with us in countries, but we don't think they're kind of one-to-one competitor with us. There are others that we do compete head-to-head to and head-to-toe. And so why join Finom? So first of all, and maybe go back to why did I join Finom? I think there are 3 reasons for that. Number one, this space is incredibly interesting. So you have few markets where consolidation or kind of really land grab has worked out and come to true. In the US, in the UK, in Asia, right? In Europe, across Europe, pan-Europe, like I said before, there isn't a single provider that is number one. And so the opportunity is there, firmly there. Second, business banking in general is getting a lot more exciting. It used to be quite dry, 10 years ago, right? I think as a fintech, now you do a lot more than just banking. So the banking rails that you would build, what we call is really the right to play. It doesn't give you the right to win. And so the right to win is really the customer experience, what you build around it, and the problems that you solve for businesses or entrepreneurs. And then finally, why join Finom is, I think it's the culture, right? So, and what sold me is we have great founders who have gone through lots of versatility and challenge along the way building this business. And that's always something that I look for, which is, how committed are they? And what kind of a culture they have built to bring this to life. And so if you were to join Finom as a product person, I think you would see ambition, really focus on metrics and getting the business to our North Star metric. Very open culture. So transparency on all things, even around the business and detailed business metrics. And collaboration with colleagues to help you be successful. With an expectation that you will deliver. And that's always the case.
Amazing. It sounds like a fantastic time to join Finom. So I'd like to move to scaling secrets. How do you embed customer delivery and discovery and iteration, in particular in financial products, when customer needs are always so diverse as well?
I think, and this is, go back to my story earlier, that kind of when companies mature, there's much more internal pondering than really going out and listening to customers. I think you do need to listen to your users, not necessarily because they will never tell you what you should build, but what problems they have, right? And then translating it into a solution. So customer research plays still a pivotal role for us as well. And this is what I try to introduce to every single product team that I'm part of, which is we have to be customer centric. It's also something that builds empathy for product people with users. So, if you just deliver things, right, and you don't feel the pain of users, you very, very often lose touch of what you're building and why. If you feel the pain and you empathize with users, you can also celebrate successes, and it feels much better, right? And so, how do you do that in a fintech setting, or how do you do it in a banking setting, like you would do in anywhere else? So it doesn't really change the game. So users are very keen, very often, to speak to you, give you feedback about how your product is doing. Also help, say the things that are good about your product and what you should accelerate. And where I think in a kind of a mass market product that comes to life is not the stuff you learn from one user, two users, three users, but what are really the trends that you see, right? So how can you connect the things you hear from users from where the business wants to go or where we should be heading, and then how you solve for that.
And what do you think, like, well, what makes European fintech different from maybe Silicon Valley or pure London models, shall we say?
Yeah, so I think it's quite like the markets, a lot more disaggregated. And if you look at a lot of the leading European fintechs, there are lots of either US capital or UK capital in those fintechs as well, Finom included. So we have some investors, obviously, that have been with us for a very long time, and new investors as well from mainland. But I think there are definitely differences in that. So I would say probably the European market is a lot more distinct and specific, and so you also have lots of fintechs who specialize in very countries or industries or sectors, right? And so I think it's a very different ecosystem still, but I think it's getting there as well, right? So I mean, there are a bunch of very successful pan-European companies that obviously are funded by very successful VCs out of mainland Europe too.
Yeah. What's the one principle that you use to align engineers, designers, and data science all on a shared mission together?
Yeah. So I think the key to this is the team and the how do you gel the team and how do you make them all responsible. And so I think the magic in product and customer-facing product comes to life when those three have an incredible relationship, ways of working, and respect, where creativity can flourish, right? And so, and the main thing for them is making sure that none of those teams become just a delivery team. So, and I have a high bar for design. So what I mean by that is very often in kind of very modern product organizations, you even see the design being a delivery function. And I think if you look at some of the more elegant products out there, I think they treat design very differently than some other product organizations. So design plays a central role, and that's something we're going to double down on as well. And so, first of all, design not being seen as a delivery function, but actually very often being ahead of the product team, which is a controversial thing to say, and in their ideation, in their research, right, and bringing concepts and ideas to life. Product people being the ones who understand the business, create clarity, right, create objectives, and development teams that are, again, not seen as delivery function, but as a partner. So I don't think that just simple delivery leads to great results. In the short run, it can be quite effective. I can say that as well. But in the long run, it usually takes an important voice away from the table, and the cracks start to show. So what I usually say is kind of your product and tech decisions usually show kind of 12 to 18 months after you put the team in place. And so, good decisions today will hopefully pay off in kind of 12 to 18 months.
And are you seeing like a big shift in terms of the roles and how they've changed and how they've evolved in terms of maybe what you would have hired 2-3 years ago to what you would look for and hire for now in terms of a product person, and what excellence even looks like in product now?
Yeah, definitely. So I do think that product talent is still really hard to find. I mean, this firsthand. At tech as well, but there are, I think, a small number of really, really talented creative product people around, be that in Europe or MENA or in the US even.
It's because they talk a good game.
Yeah, exactly. And so, what we really test for, many things, right? Do you have the product craft aspect to you, right? So can you really deeply get into a problem and think through how you would solve it? Can you also be strategic? And can you formulate in the context of where we are and what we need to do? Can Can you formulate a strategy of where we should go? At all levels, we test that. It's not just for kind of more senior people. We test that even for more junior people. And I think increasingly is creativity, right? So, and that is, again, back to AI, is how are you bringing some of the ideas to life, right? What have you tried and tested? What have you built yourself? Have you been an entrepreneur? Have you built the product yourself, for yourself rather than necessarily another company? So those things matter to us.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So I want your quick answer, but also your why. Should product leaders in fintech be technologists first or bankers who think in code?
Technologists. So I think bankers who think code, you usually end up in a relatively traditional banking setting.
Yeah.
I think you have to be a technologist at heart, with an appreciation that you work in a financial setting and you're dealing people's money.
Yeah. Is trust more important than speed in financial product innovation?
Yes.
Why?
So trust is the cornerstone in finance, right? So people vote with their feet very quickly. Speed is also incredibly important, but if you have no trust, speed almost doesn't matter. And the kind of difficulty in fintech, I believe, is balancing both.
Will AI kill the PM role or supercharge it?
Supercharge it.
Why?
So I don't think PMs will go anywhere in the near future. The doom has been predicted, even for developers, and I think we're still supercharging developers. I think one of the things you cannot quite automate yet, maybe in the future will be, is the job that PM really does, which is connective tissue, right, and strategy.
Should every fintech company aim to become a bank or stay as a platform layer?
Really depends. So no clear answer to you. I think if you're in B2B or B2B2C, it's very likely you're going to end up being a bank. So in other words, if you serve end user, so be that a person or a business, it's very likely you're going to end up being a bank. It makes a lot of sense in certain growth or certain stage of company to become a bank for capital reasons. If you're a platform play, there's no need to become a bank. And there have been few platform plays that perhaps have tried to become a bank, and I don't think that's really given them anything either. It depends what business you run, but most often a bank.
What's harder to scale, a product or a culture?
Culture. So I think culture is what brings products to life very often, and culture is very hard to scale. And so the more and more I gotta spend time in product, the more I think that the culture, the people, and kind of how you bring and the craft they bring it along is usually number one determinant of success.
We're going to move to one tool, one tactic, one truth. And I'm interested to see how this compounds over a period of time of seeing what everybody says. Tool, one product or data tool that you can't live without.
For me today, it must be Gemini. I think I put pretty much everything, my whole life, through Gemini. Gemini knows more about me than anything else. More about me than my wife would believe. Exactly.
The tactic that consistently helps you to scale teams faster or build better.
I think being very cliche, right? Tactic is always personal relationships. So I think what I pride myself for is building teams where people come for the mission and they believe strongly in the mission. So that's how you usually close great talent, and that's how you keep great talent motivated.
One truth about product leadership that you wish you knew earlier.
It's a tough job. That's probably what I would say is. So I think product leadership is something that you have to be very comfortable managing up, and you have to be very comfortable managing down, and you have to do that 5 times throughout the day, right? Switch back and forth. And so I think it is for a person that really enjoys this. And it's an inevitable part of the job. So if you like to be an IC, probably not a job for you. But if you only want to be a manager as well, probably not a job for you either. You have to straddle both. You have to be the manager and you have to be the IC.
Amazing. I think we can keep these quite quick and succinct as well, because I think there's a lot of value out here. Like, when should a founder hire their first CPO? Because it comes up a lot. It comes up a lot in conversations that I have with investors as well, and the boards that sit on these companies. Like, when is the right time and why? And maybe what should the founders actually look for?
So it really depends on the business, but I would say the key determinant is, are you able and willing to let go as well of some things? And so what I found very often is, if a business is of a certain size, they hire a CPO only to realize that the founder doesn't actually want to let go of the product team. And so perhaps they thought that they had to because the investors were telling them to do that, or they themselves got incredibly stretched, right? And they go for that decision. So I think you need to go to that decision with open eyes and say that you cannot scale anymore, right? Unless you bring someone in, rather than bringing someone in just so you can satisfy someone else or some kind of a request that came.
Yeah.
So when you really have scaled yourself or spread yourself so thin that you have to rely on someone else to do the job.
And whilst we're on scale, then, like, what is the most common mistake that you see the founders make when scaling fintech products?
I think the great thing about founders very often is that they have strong beliefs. The worst thing about great founders sometimes is that they have strong beliefs. And so what that means is, they obviously have to be people that are, believe in their own vision, right? That they're creative for the business. But sometimes it's worth pressure testing that. So perhaps the vision is even true, but the way you get to that could be quite different. And I think that's the key mistake, which is assuming that you know everything, and maybe not kind of looking outside. And I think that even applies to product. Assuming that you know everything is quite dangerous. I think you need to be constantly on the lookout for kind of how can you learn more, how can you upskill yourself, and how can you learn through others.
Yeah, how do you continuously evolve? And if you were an advising an investor, like, what would be the early product signals that would show that a fintech startup might be a success and scale?
I think that's basically, how do you determine product market fit, right? So that to me is usually a sign that this is probably an investable business in an early stage, and you can draw kind of whatever metric, right? So lots of metrics in the industry that are being used for that. I think the best way I can explain this is that if you look at any combination of the things that the business tells you, do you feel like this business needs to pedal really hard just to stay at the same place? Or is this business growing through a channel or through a product that they've created, not fully organically even, right? But do you feel like there's kind of forward momentum? And I think that's the key one. So if you pedal really, really hard just to stay in the same place, that usually isn't a sign of success.
Mm. And how do you measure the depth of customer love beyond just NPS or engagement?
So it always comes back to usage, right? And so, the same thing. I've gone throughout my product career on kind of exploration of kind of what metric you should use for products in general. And for tech products, it always comes back to usage. And so if you're able to thrill the customers, if you're able to bring them into your ecosystem recurringly, right, that usually means that you build loyalty with them, and the likelihood is very high that you're going to be able to attract more of their business over to you. And that also probably means that you built a product that is delightful. You built a product that people want to use.
And if we look to the future in AI, and we've touched on it a bit, but I did have some questions on it. Like, what do you actually genuinely feel is the future of AI-powered banking, and what parts of that might be misunderstood still?
I think for me to put a prediction in what AI-powered banking would look like, I think I could put 10 ideas in the paper, and I'll probably be wrong on all 10. So there are probably quite a few intermediate steps on how banking will evolve. But
Just on that, then, is that like also balancing automation with the human side of finance as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And an interesting trend that I see, is regardless of how good, for example, your chatbots might be, people still like to speak to people, right? That's
Hopefully.
also yeah. But really, I think we'll see quite a few intermediate steps here. So how user interfaces and how that will change, I think that will happen in the next kind of 6 to 18 months or so. We'll see a lot more different user interfaces prop up, all powered by AI behind the scenes. Some of those will be quite good, some of those not so good. But really kind of where finance will go across, I think we would have to imagine that perhaps is there even a need for banking interface at some point in the future? And we're getting much better at connecting, tools and apps and things like that, right? Will you just do banking, not through a banking app?
What would you do it through then?
Through some other apps that you end up using, right?
Interesting.
And today, if you look at your iPhone or whatever phone you use, you probably have hundreds of apps, right? Do you need hundreds of apps in the future?
No, I mean, an interesting conversation. You're already seeing how that's evolving and planning out with things that you never thought that you would use that you are using today. So, like, where do you see the next breakout fintech coming from? Where with it, embedded finance? Is it AI? Is it vertical SaaS? What does that look like, do you think?
Yeah, so I think there's some interesting things to look at. So obviously, I think AI is just a trend. It's worth obviously keeping and seeing what's being created in that space. And I do think that it does actually create quite a lot of interesting opportunities in the space. I think there's another wave which I'm quite bullish on, stable coins, and what that will bring to the kind of world finance and kind of currencies and international payments. I think that's a really interesting space.
Do you think that's where stable coins will have its value across international payments?
Absolutely. And yeah, overall, I think what you will see is some of the fintech players become bigger and bigger. So that's probably we'll see.
And do you think new ones will rival like sort of a Revolut, Stripe in the next few years, decade, whatever it might be?
If I had to take a guess, I'd probably say unlikely. So I think the huge cycle in fintech investment in that kind of pseudo banking, kind of like Revolut is, right? I think it'd be very tough to compete and very hard to raise capital to build something like that today.
So let's finish up on the last quick fire round then. What's the next barrier you personally want to break as a CPO?
I think hypergrowth is the next thing. So I love the stage of companies, scale-ups, because scale-ups already have product market fit, very, very clear. And the art in that is kind of how do you turn this into an incredibly fast scaling business, right? Kind of like Revolut style business, while still making sure that you do that for the right reason and that growth's not fake.
And if you could make one bold prediction about fintech product design in 2030, what would that be?
I think 2030, like I said, is their product design.
Build global scale or solve local depth first?
Depending on your business strategy. Both can work really successfully. The game we're in at Finom is local depth. The game that obviously some of our competitors are in global scale. So it really depends on what your business strategy is.
How do you think about that from like a Middle East perspective then as well? Because a lot of the conversation there is about scaling global from day one. Think global, basically, in terms of their ecosystem and growth and potential.
Yeah, so I think in the Middle East, you still see, I would say it's a bit like a European situation, to be honest. So lots of disaggregated services. And I do think it's another region prime for disruption in that space. And I believe the UAE is making strides towards that to enable that, which is really exciting, I think, for this region as a whole. But I think you kind of have to, again, depends on what product you build, what type of product you build. But I'd say local depth matters a lot. And it's really hard to teleport or kind of port over what you perhaps did in one country exactly verbatim in a different country. And even between UAE and Saudi, right? Regardless of how similar those markets might be.
And then what's one last piece of advice that you'd give to other chief product officers, doesn't have to be in fintech, and any barrier that they should go out and break themselves?
I think the advice that I would give to people is experiment, take bets. So if you have to live for something, right? And be comfortable also being wrong. So not all those things are going to work out. Take some bets, and make sure that those bets are recurring. So it's not one or two bets. You have some bold bets or a couple of product bets happening recurringly, and make sure that at least some of them are very successful.
And is there any one last question you might have for me to leave our audience with?
My question for you would be, you've obviously been in this region now for a couple of years. And what would you say about kind of the depth of the market in the UAE? And what's your prediction of how technology will evolve in this ecosystem?
I mean, prediction is, look, it's an exciting place. It's an evolving ecosystem, and there's a lot of opportunity here. And I think it's also about curbing the enthusiasm there as well of what's actually possible. It's great to have a lot of executives globally that are relocating to the region that can bring their expertise and help scale and move these businesses faster. But yeah, I think, which is why I asked that question, because a lot of the conversations that I had before with investors that maybe want to deploy capital here is all about, yes, they're interested, but are the founders thinking globally? And I think for a long time they've been thinking locally. Now you're seeing businesses like Stake and Husby expand into new markets. And I think it's like anything, you'll start to see these businesses following suits and obviously hiring the
Absolutely.
right people to actually help this growth. And I think you need people that, I always say, you need people that have been there and done it, that have got the t-shirt, that can give you that 10x in return. I think there's been a lot of resistance to that in the past to a certain extent, or not hiring the right people. But now we're seeing founders want to invest in the right hiring and talent strategy and working with the right partners to be able to do it. So, and then obviously Saudi Arabia is a whole different ballgame in terms of the investment across the whole economy there and the excitement there. So yeah, I think it's a great future here, and I think there's a lot of opportunities as well for other businesses to actually start to think about expanding into this market as well, from their perspective.
Fully, and I think on the local perspective is make something work locally. But even lots of the businesses that I kind of see here usually start somewhere, but they already think how to scale in the MENA region, which is very exciting. And I think that is something new, like you said. That is probably last couple of years where people are starting to think that way.
Yeah, and the government's behind all of these initiatives, and especially with the acceleration of AI in the economy and becoming an AI first ecosystem, which is exciting. So I think that also opens up doors and opportunities.
Absolutely.
Kristjan, thank you for joining Breaking Down Barriers. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure.
And I've got one more thing to add for our audience. So I've got something interesting for you and a quick ask right now. 72% of the people who listen to this podcast every week are not subscribed. That's totally cool, but here's the thing. Subscribing helps unlock bigger guests, deeper insights, and the kind of episodes that genuinely make a difference to the ecosystem. So if you're taking value from the show right now, even once, could you hit that button? It's free, it takes 1 second, and it generally helps shape the future of this podcast. And who knows, you might tap into the reason why we get the CTO of Amazon next month.